It's official, Mike. He's out of the race, and apparently, as we've both been calling very publicly for a long time now, Kamala Harris is the presumptive Democratic nominee. Are you on board, or what are your thoughts on this?
So I think probably the first voices I heard a while ago after Biden's very poor debate performance was Smirkanish. Granted, there were others, but he was one of the first ones to talk about it. Is he saw a very fatal flaw in the Biden campaign. For me, I had kind of been ascribing to the idea if enough Democrats keep coming out publicly, it is a fait accompli. It's just it's just a matter of time until it happens. So I don't want to say that I'm behind Harris, but I think that she's ultimately going to be the nominee after a symbolic convention, even though they say they're going to open.
I mean, the writing's been on the wall, and what I always say is, like, if I know it, if you know it, if it's like out there, of course they know it. So we all knew it. I mean, presumably the talking heads on the TV knew it. Why on earth did we wait so long, or they wait so long? And I guess the answer would be because it's now this big dramatic change, and it's
Sure.
the Streisand effect. I mean, is it though? Is it? I don't know.
So I don't think that this was a spur of the moment decision. I don't think they made it just this weekend. I think that there's a lot of key people that they called and plans that they had in motion to make sure that funding, like donations that were sent in already can be moved to Harris. They didn't do this on a whim. This is not something they take a chance on, right? So I think that this is the last week they had seen that writing on the wall, especially with the George Clooney op-ed piece coming out, against Biden. When you start losing like Hollywood, like when you start losing the court of public opinion, right? That's when things get really dangerous. When you have the big call with donors and talking about withholding donations, I mean, that's the lifeblood of the political campaign, right? Is money. If you don't have it, you can't run the campaign, no matter how good your name recognition is. So yeah, I just think that once those things started to happen, it just was inevitable.
So, I mean, obviously now there's no primary for the Democrats, and this means that whoever is going to come up is going to be selected by the DNC. So at that convention, all the delegates, I guess, will write it down, and they'll go through this process of selecting from whom they believe it is. One thing I hear a lot is that there's going to be a problem with the ballots. Oh my God, we printed all the ballots for November. We can't print paper anymore. I think it's such garbage. Like, they're going to get ballots made, or
Right,
the voter's
right.
going to write the person in. I mean, there's all of these steps, right? But the end of the day, what didn't happen is that Democratic people didn't get a voice, and it's all this process and procedure is kind of saying, oh well, here we have to do it this way, that way. There was no vote, period. Like, I just talked to my mom when I was driving past, and I said, well, are you happy? Your candidate was selected for you now. You don't get a choice. You don't. Well, don't we get another primary? No, you don't get a primary now.
Right,
We've
right,
been telling
yeah.
you, everybody knows it. That's sorry.
So it's going to go to an open convention. In theory, that's what they're suggesting, and this is within the playbook. This is totally allowed by the rules, but it is, as you said, people who voted in all these other primaries, their vote is essentially kind of thrown out here, right? Because their candidate is gone. So now what happens to, I think it's about 4,000 delegates, it's just short of that number, that were pledged to Biden. There can't just be given from Biden to Harris. She's got to kind of earn them now. So she's, like I said, I don't think this was a spur of the moment decision. I think that they've been talking to some key people for a while. You had people like Mark Halperin, who's a pretty big political pundit, talking about his inside sources maybe a week or two ago. And what I thought was really weird this morning, Elizabeth Warren was on, I want to say it was ABC, if my wife was remembering correctly. She helped me out before. Was talking about how if President Biden stepped out, we need to be prepared to rally behind, Kamala Harris. And lo and behold, just like a couple hours later, the official announcement came out. And I don't think that was an accident, and I don't think that the timing was a coincidence. So,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? So, yeah. So, I mean, what is your thoughts from the outside, right? This looks like a complete disarray, from, anyone from the Republican or the right side.
I will say this, and I've been publicly stating that, I'm on the right, but I believe that Trump was going to have a tough time against Biden, and that was my thought up until a couple months ago, and when the Biden crash landing at that debate happened, and that's when I said, okay, wow, I went from cautiously pessimistic on Trump to cautiously optimistic on him. And then when the assassination attempt happened, which of course we also have to talk about more, I said, oh my God, now I am so bullish on Trump. This guy cannot lose. Like, the bravest hero image you could imagine is he's standing up in the face of these flying bullets overhead. So now, though, that Biden's dropped out, it does add a level of questions. And that's where I'm saying that I might be going back to cautiously pessimistic on this, because we've now got this, African American woman, big track record with the Biden administration, right? She's going to be able to tout all of these, what are being called successes, right? There are ways to frame them however you choose. And she's kind of going to be given this rainbows and unicorn pathway into a easy convention and then into the race in November. I mean, she's just going to run this whole
coronation, as I like to call it. I mean,
exactly.
More or less, they're saying they're not handing it off, but that's more or less what's happening here. And I think it might have been done on purpose too, because right, they ask, why did Biden wait so long, right? If I'm being really cynical, wouldn't this be really great? Wait till after the RNC. You have no idea what's going to happen, right? I'm talking months ago. Maybe you're just long gaming this. But wait till after the RNC. We have a lot of things set in motion and people can't back out even if they wanted to. Then we'll have Biden step out, and it'll be nice and dramatic. It'll steal the entire media narrative, because that's what Trump is really, really good at doing. I mean, obviously, by no fault of his own, there was an assassination attempt on his life. But between that, the recent trial victories that he had, being able to get off of the document charges, or at least for now, and then criminal immunity behind it, right? So it's this series of victories, and then even if you perceived his, someone on the left might perceive his speech at the RNC as, less than desirable, less than impactful, it still has the ability to steal that media narrative, and that's exactly what the Biden campaign, or former campaign, has done now.
Yeah, well, there's still the middle of the country, and that message of unity is what Trump wanted to put forward after the assassination. But I think the reality of the independent voter is that the very few of them are engaged enough to watch an RNC speech. And I would bet that most of this country, if they pulled one thing away from that, it's an image of Hulk Hogan ripping his shirt off. And that's about all that they've gained from that. Yeah. So I'm not too worried about what Trump said, but I didn't even listen to his speech. Actually, I tweeted out I was watching The Bachelorette that night, because honestly, I don't know what we're still waiting for over here, right? We don't need to hear Trump repeat the same things every single night. In fact, I've been one on the right to say, okay, a rally is really exciting. It might be fun to go. I've never been, but it doesn't really indicate that you're going to get 82 million votes, which is presumably what you need. And we saw Hillary Clinton, hint, hint, I'm bringing up her name in a second, but she held a rally in the milk aisle of a Costco and barely had 17 people there, but she still came pretty darn close to winning. So a rally isn't that indicative, but that's where I was going, is that actually now with this election coming up, there's new people and new names that are going to get floated, not just who we have seen recently, and you can name them better than I can, but Whitmer or Newsom or maybe even Mrs. Obama, but maybe even Hillary Clinton will throw her name into the race here, because she has had her Democratic cohorts wrapped around her finger for quite some time now, and well, she hasn't exactly disappeared. Where do you put the power rankings?
I definitely put her way in and out. Way down and out. I along with Michelle Obama. I think both of them want to be out of politics. I think they enjoy the outsider kind of kingmaker status that they kind of can afford, because their support is golden. They still have donation networks that they can help trickle to campaigns of importance. But again, I don't think I see any of them approaching the ticket. So in my perspective, I don't think that the Democratic Party can afford to pass over Kamala Harris in any way. It would be political suicide, in my opinion. As you mentioned before, you have this from the perspective of a Democrat, a competent black female who can run on Biden's record in many ways. She's just as good as anybody else. So why would you pass over this person who's sitting there waiting for the job, right? So the real meat on the bones is, who are the VP selections in my mind, right? These are the people who would have, in a open primary process, have been throwing their names in, and I think now they're kind of queuing up for their VP selection process, because you see a lot of their Wikipedia pages kind of getting updated. They've been doing the rounds on the media this week that have all seemed like a VP selection process, and now I'm looking in hindsight, it seems that way. But this is my power ranking now that I've gone in a long-winded way. But it's going to be number 1, Gretchen Whitmer. I know that's bold, and it says 2 women, on a ticket. I think that this is an election of not a safe VP choice, where Hillary might have picked Tim Kaine or something like that, just a middle state or some other random place that you need the electoral votes. I think this is a boldness election. I think there's a lot about her that makes it a very compelling ticket, and we can dig into that later. But I also think Mark Kelly from Arizona, that's a really, really big name. Former astronaut. His wife is Miss Giffords, right? Also a potential victim of an assassination attempt almost. And then you have Governor Andy Bashar from Kentucky. So I think these are all names in my top three who are probably those gearing up for that VP list.
Interesting. Well, speaking of VPs, one thing that I was so disappointed about, I mean, I guess I shouldn't say disappointed because I was just had maybe my sights set on somebody else, Vivek Ramaswamy. But the truth is that I feel like J.D. Vance as a selection for Trump is such a fizzle. It's not really a bang. It's not really a pop. And I'm not really sure what he's going for. Everyone says, oh, he's got the Rust Belt and the Bible Belt. Like, yeah, Trump's got the Rust Belt and the Bible Belt. I'm not really so sure what's going on here.
He's 2028 pick. He's the one who could carry on Trump's legacy, in my opinion. That's that choice. If
I guess, well, what did we think about Ron DeSantis? He's just out of the cards then, or he's living in Florida for the rest of his life?
I'm maybe a little bit too biased. I'm not a big fan of him. I think he demonstrated that he just doesn't have the acumen to make it to like a national stage. I think he's a good administrator. He suffers from the Hillary Clinton syndrome, where you're a good administrator, but you're a terrible campaigner. People just don't like your personality. You're not good in the public face, right? But maybe behind the scenes, you get the job done and you could push policy to the selected people that matter and something like that. So the fact that DeSantis lost his own state in the primary election to Donald Trump, to me, speaks of his political weakness, like I said, in that ability to run on a national stage like that. That's why you pick someone like J.D. Vance, is he's just bold, he's a maverick, and I think because they converted him a little bit, he's a guy that they believe then would be more willing to then still carry on, the Trump legacy if they manage to get elected.
Yeah, loyalty is big in Trump's world. Well,
yeah, absolutely.
Hey, did you listen to the leaked phone call from RFK Jr. and Trump after the assassination attempt?
I did. If if there's any last shred of doubt that I would have voted for RFK Jr. and or like Trump, I mean, that was just not a very promising phone call in my regard.
Well, I think he still throws a major wrench into the general election because, like we're talking about, I think people don't realize they see this as such a polarized, bipartisan country of left and right. But really, and I believe these numbers are fairly accurate. It's like 25% and 25% Republicans and Democrats, and that leaves 50% of the country where really 40% are like independent, moderate, centrists, and then you have this 10% not engaged.
Yeah.
But that means that RFK, I think, really could garner quite a bit because you still now have this issue where we're never Trump, or some people, right? Whoever is never Trump is never Trump.
Yeah,
and then you have the never Bidens, but now are they going to be converts? I don't know if they are. I don't see it necessarily as so set. I don't.
If you're voting for Biden before, you're voting for whoever the nominee is coming up, right? In my opinion, right? There's no reason why you wouldn't vote for Harris. I think there's just such a small amount of Democrats are disenfranchised, but I think it will come down to the independents in this election. So I think it's right now might have been Harris and Trump, or maybe this was just before this was Biden against Trump, and it was 46-46. So that's still like 8 to 10%, like you said, the people who are kind of disengaged right now that are still undecided, but you're going to need them in the general election, to potentially go either way. And that's where RFK Jr. stands to be the spoiler candidate in each, right? Neither party can stand to lose specific key groups, and he threatens both of them, So he's definitely 100%. A threat to both campaigns for sure.
Well, you said the word disenfranchisement, and that's really one of the words that's going to be used a lot over the next couple months, because truly, if someone's expecting to walk into this convention and walk out with this nomination, I mean, she's got to go on, Kamala has to go on a press tour, podcasts, she's got to go on every TV channel. I mean, at this point, and I've been saying this, my prediction is still that before October, maybe early October, again, because I don't think printing new ballots is a real problem for the Democrat states.
Absolutely,
but I think that he will step down from the presidency because there's no better way to even triple down on this Streisand effect we're already getting and make her the first female president immediately. Why wait? Why wait till November? It's a threat to democracy, isn't it, Mike?
So that's where I would disagree with you, actually. The reason why I see him staying in is because he is the perfect straw man. He's the perfect martyr, right? Like, so every moment that you're talking about Biden, you're not talking about the new potential presumptive nominee, right? So I'm sure he can just happily take all the flack, keep making fun of my age, etc., and he'll just say, I'm not the candidate anymore, right? So that the game's really in his favor in that regard.
Yeah, well, they also are going to look at her track record, because I believe she was the
Absolutely.
czar of the border, which had remained open up until about 6 months ago, and that's going to be probably the biggest issue in this election coming up. That and the inflation that's going on, and I don't believe that she has very many high level accomplishments in either of those areas, unless I'm missing something.
So what she could do is selectively and kind of, like you said, you can frame anything how you want to. She could frame the things, many parts of Biden's record to her favor, and then spin away from ones that are not. But the immigration one will surely be a tough one to do, because that was one that kind of landed directly in her court in a lot of regards. So people are going to remember that. And I think, as many pundits, it's not just us talking heads here, other pundits, recognize that the immigration is going to be a big issue on the ballot for both parties.
Yeah, that's very nice that you would refer to us as pundits, Mike. Thank you. That's very reassuring. I mean, listen, honestly, do you feel that you missed an opportunity to put your vote in a primary, or hear debates going on? Presumably we won't get any of those. Do you feel disenfranchised?
So the problem is I've been disenfranchised for so many months. It's almost kind of like, at this point, it's like, oh, really, like this too. Like I'm just so checked out anyway. So, I was voting for Democrat, unfortunately. So it doesn't really matter who it was, short of the most heinous candidate, which I can't come up with the name of. But it's just interesting to see what has happened in the last few weeks. Things that, normally happen over a course of years have happened just within the last month or so. So it's just fascinating kind of watching from the outside. And then we will see if this is a true open convention process. 109 days or 107 days or something like that till election. That's still longer than most democracies around the world have their election cycles. So my suspicions is there's so many more headlines to still come out until we get to election day.
Well, hey, Tucker Carlson was calling it for months now, saying, they took him to court, they took his businesses, they're taking his all of his associates are going to jail. Now, finally, there's only going to be one thing left, which is to take his life. And they did, well, not they, but there was this spun up, deranged individual that shot at his head. And the truth is that, okay, he was a registered Republican. Guess what? He was 20 years old. You can only vote if you're 18. So likely the guy never voted. He definitely didn't vote for a president or not. But also, he was spun up that he hates Trump. He hates, this is my assumption, right? But it's that he sees Trump as this existential threat to democracy, which has been so spun up. And this is something I was texting you that day, is that's what the rhetoric is. And that's my true belief. The rhetoric is coming from the media, coming from the Oval Office, coming from many people in the Senate, and the left. Whereas the right is saying, we are going to fight, exactly what Trump said when he came up. What you're still hearing, though, is that Trump is a threat. And what do we do to threats? We have to neutralize threats. An existential threat. And democracy is the most important thing. Wouldn't we agree? Democracy. So that is what needs to stop. I mean, right now, what we're witnessing in real time is the president, who was not democratically elected in a primary process because he was the only option. Okay, I'm not going back to 2020 on that one, but he was he was not voted for in a primary. Now you're going to get someone who was really not voted in a primary, wasn't even a backup option because there were no backup options. Right. All of this is coming at a 1 million mile per hour pace, and it's like drinking from a fire hose. So it's very interesting to see all of this play out in real time. And I don't know how it could get crazier, is what the long way to say what I was answering.
So I think it was about 3 days after the assassination, I saw both sides of the media right back to exactly where they were. The other side is a threat, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought this would be a nice, like, kind of crisis learning moment, but unfortunately it wasn't. I think for most people, they still see the other side as not the loyal opposition, but as the enemy. So, I hope that at least violence is tamped down. But I think what is going to be interesting now is really kind of teasing through the investigation around the Secret Service handling of that, the boundaries between where the Secret Service responsibility was and local law enforcement's, and then how that's going to be pinned back onto Biden and their negligence and things like that. I think that's going to be the next headlines that'll come out is any kind of emerging details, because the director is certainly receiving a ton of flack right now, as she rightfully should.
Listen, I agree with you 100% personally. I'm just curious if the Trump camp agrees in that we need to be talking about the Secret Service and all of those brave men who, listen, one of my closest friends is an ex-Secret Service agent, and I texted him when I watched what happened on TV because I said, oh my God, the bravery of those agents that were on the stage right there,
Right.
regardless of all of the prep work or that was or wasn't done. But when they heard shots, they ran in. They knew that they were running into the bullet fire right then and there. So that is remarkable bravery. So is it the right move for Trump, who's pro-police, who's pro, law enforcement in all these ways? Is it really the right move to go against this FBI, CIA, right, to go against the Secret Service? I don't know if that's the right move for his campaign.
So I think it was either, I can't remember which one of his sons, it was either Donald Jr. or Eric Trump, but he was speaking very highly of the female Secret Service agent that much of the internet quickly jumped onto as the DEI hire, and he had nothing but nice things to say about them. But that's because all Secret Service agents are dedicated to their job, and they do not hesitate to take a bullet for the president. I mean, could there be some questions about finding agents of, the appropriate height for a taller figure like Donald Trump? Donald Trump did also lunge into the air when, like most other presidents, would be, coaxed to keep their head down below them and stuff like that. So, again, I'm not pointing fingers. So I don't believe the Secret Service agents will be to blame. I don't think the Trump campaign will point them to blame. But I think, unfortunately, is they probably won't be able to point fingers where I think a lot of the blame does need to be pointed at. I think it's going to be a combination of Secret Service funding. It's kind of like that last 9/11 segment, not to plug, a documentary that we just recently did, but it's kind of like a hindsight is 2020. Like, oh, we should have had more funding, we should have had more agents, and we should have taken these threats more seriously. Maybe they just got so lax because Donald Trump was such a liked figure in that area, in the rural parts of Pennsylvania. They overlook things, but we also remember that there were a lot of local law enforcement who I think they were inside that building when all of that was going down, right? So it's going to be a question of how much do you trust local law enforcement with the responsibility of the things that like Secret Service does that receives a whole different kind of level of training and just the way they assess a situation. So for heaven's sake, I hope that at least we can, objectively look at it and assure that something like that never ever happens again. But I know budgets have certainly significantly increased. It's going to be the investigations, like I said, that'll be interesting on how they spin.
Well, it's got to be honestly terrifying to be any sort of politician running for office right now, going up in front of a crowd, because I don't believe this shooter had any real political affiliation at the end of the day. I think it was said that he was maybe intending to go after both folks, and that's...
Yeah, so his backup plans, right? He had explosives in the car, and this is kind of a situation where, he gave $15 to like a Democratic PAC, but he was a registered Republican. It's just, this is the hallmarks of someone who, and especially at 20 years old, I'm sorry, you remember ourselves. These were our formative years. We weren't really the people who we would eventually come to be. I think he was just a very troubled person, and that if he didn't do this, he would have done some other, violent event elsewhere. It was just a matter of timing, and luck. I don't want to call it that. Unfortunate timing. We'll just leave it at that. Yeah. Thankfully, the assassination, didn't succeed that day, because we'd be looking at a whole different timeline now, to say the least.
It's crazy that one, messed up kid in the rural Midwest can, create such a stir and potentially change the course of history if that quarter inch was a little bit different. It puts things into perspective, and I don't think that a lot of people online are really giving that the observance maybe that it really is due. I mean, listen, I was on the record here today. I say that I'm now checking myself back to cautiously pessimistic on a Trump victory with the things that are changing now. Mike, will you go on the record and say how you feel about that?
I feel very confident now in a Democratic victory. I feel like we were pretty despondent before. I think this invigorates people. I think that before you were getting a lot of people who were just going to stay home, and I think people might be excited now at this prospect. Like I said, you're just changing the whole narrative, and you're kind of taking back the media, cycle. So I think that it's a little better chances now.
All right. Well, what else is there to touch on before we close this one?
Don't forget to tune into our, a 4-part series that's being released. So definitely check it out. It's very relevant. We have the anniversary of 9/11 coming up. So we definitely want to pay tribute to all the memories and honor their sacrifice on that day, as well as the story of how it came to be.
That's right. And as we watch all of the craziness unfold in real time, it is interesting. And that's part of what the message of that series is to kind of show that, well, a lot of those crazinesses were happening back then as well. Whether or not there was women in the White House with some of the prior administrations, or if there were improper intelligence reports coming out, all of these things had happened. And it's important to understand what happened then so we can call it out when it happens now. With that, this weekend, we visited the beach and I got myself a new hat. It says, "Stay salty." And that is going to be my little snarky message to those people who say, we don't get to vote now. No, you don't get to vote. You
Stay
didn't want to
salty.
vote, so you got to stay salty now, guys. Sorry to say it. Well, Mike, with that, this has been Elevated.
You left us hanging there, Coop.
I know. Well, I did. I was kind of hoping. I don't know. I didn't ask a question, so.
Yeah, no, you